So good morning, colleagues. Sanibonani. Goeiemorgen. Tabela. So, how's everybody feeling this morning? Grumpy? Chilled? Okay, so who are cricket fans here? So it looks like South Africa is going to score about 330 runs this morning. AB de Villiers has just scored 50 odd off 30 balls, and Rousseau 50 off 30 balls. So it looks like there's some momentum building there. So you can relax now. So I scan the room and what do I find in the eyes? So you look into your own eyes, what do you find? You look into your own soul. How do you feel this morning? It looks a mixed bag, eh? It's a mixed bag. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So okay, that's a bit too loud now. So as Professor Senna has encouraged us this morning is really an opportunity for us to share together, to reflect on the journey traveled. And so I will kick off with a few remarks, and the idea is really for us to spontaneously talk about the journey. It's been a journey of tumult, right? It's been a journey of storms. It's been a journey of gale, okay, nothing to do with Chris Gale. It's been a journey of gale force winds that have battered us. It's been a journey filled with many valleys. And sometimes for us individually, too few pinnacle points. Bless you. That was a loud one. It's the season coming. And so it's been a journey of many valleys, but certainly collectively there have been along the way many mountain tops that we have reached. When asked the question, so what explains this progress? What explains this accomplishment? My response always is character. That character is often the differentiator between just getting along or accomplishing extraordinary things. As we know the saying, it is attitude that determines one's altitude. And so my reflex response often when asked the question, so what explains the institution, our collective progress and our accomplishment? And let's pause for a moment as we reflect on that accomplishment. Just briefly, just headlines. 2.5 billion rands plus invested in infrastructure in the institution. probably a quarter university funds, which we've used to leverage public funds and private funds. Progress with our undergraduate success rates have now reached a new high. Almost 85% of undergraduate modules were successfully completed last year. Our graduate output continues to grow. Our research output has tripled in the past decade. And we can go down the list. We continue to project, but also provide what we have become known for as a place of accessible excellence. Our enrollment dipped and then grew again. The kind of student that we now enroll is increasingly reflective of the best of the graduating matric classes. Last year, more than a third, close to 35%, in fact 35% plus, of students who enrolled in the university had an APS score of 35 plus or B and better. But as we seek to improve that, we continue to make sure that the first year class includes young men and women, sometimes mature, but mainly young men and women, who come from the poorest amongst us. 20% of our first year class come from schools in quintile 1 and quintile 2, meaning schools serving the poorest of the poor in our nation. With poverty sitting somewhere between 25% and 30% in our nation, 20% of our first year class come from the poorest of the poor in our nation. And so if we look for character, we look for character inside ourselves as individuals, and we look at the character that we display as a collective. And so when we ask the question, what is a great university? Can you point for me a great university? I'm sure you've got many answers. I'm sure the first name that may come to mind is Harvard, or Cambridge, or Oxford, or Stanford, or Princeton, or Yale. Maybe MIT comes to mind, and so on. And so greatness, in our narrative of greatness, has become research output and research impact, correctly so, on the world. Less so graduate output and the kind of teaching and learning that we provide. Even less so our efforts as universities to embrace the weakest amongst us, the most vulnerable amongst us, and the poorest in our nation. In fact, to put it bluntly, greatness means excluding. It seems to me that we have begun to interrogate that narrative as this university. that as essential, as important as research is, and the contributions of research is absolutely important to creating and building a more prosperous world, a more prosperous nation here in South Africa. Yes, it is important. Yes, it's fundamental to our human progress. Yes, it's fundamental to our ability to tackle the grand global challenges that confound us as a planet, as humanity. So yes, research. And yes, undergraduate contributions. Our contributions to nurturing men and women of substance who, because of our effort, not despite our effort, are going to shape and transform the world into a far more prosperous, far more inclusive, far more caring world. Young men and women, often mature, who graduate beginning next Monday, as some 8,600 will graduate between now and May, 50% at least of whom are first-generation graduates. Just look at the fundamental transformation that will occur as a consequence of that catalytic intervention of ours in the lives of these men and women, in the lives of their families, in the lives of their communities. Yet, greatness is not counted, or at least put more correctly, this does not count in greatness. So there's something wrong, isn't there? That greatness is simply research. And so our greatest accomplishment in our first decade is perhaps less the fact that we have evolved into a world-class university. It's perhaps less because our law and education programs, amongst others, are ranked in the top 200 programs in the world. It is perhaps less because of the fact that our arts and humanities are ranked in the top 400 in the world. It's perhaps less because our natural sciences are ranked in the top 400 programs in the world. Our greatest accomplishment has been to engage this narrative of greatness, not only conceptually, not only theoretically, but in practice, in action. And so for me, and I hope in the decade that lies ahead as we begin this new decade, this year, that we will be much more forceful, much more deliberative, much more confident about the manner in which we are redefining greatness. So yes, it's important for us to be a world-class university, precisely because we are seeking to change the narrative about greatness. If we are a national university, as many of our peers are, correctly so, if we are a national university, we are not going to influence that narrative. If we're not at the table of the top 100 universities, even though we are ranked in the top 650 ourselves. But if we're not at the table of the top 100 universities, we're not going to influence this dialogue. We're not going to shape this narrative or reshape that narrative. That research itself needs to recognize, that researchers and scholars themselves need to recognize that ultimately, that fundamentally, research cannot be just about research of the North. It cannot just be about discursive questions and issues that relate to the north and increasingly to the east. And so our next decade must be, yes, about us, but it must also be a decade about South Africa and Africa. It must be a decade of this university of ours deliberately, definitively becoming a Pan-African epicenter of critical intellectual inquiry. It cannot be the case that Africa's evolution in its century, the 21st century, it cannot be the case that its evolution will be a helter-skelter, untidy evolution that is influenced by East and West, and where Africa's own narrative of its own evolution and of its own rise to greatness as a continent is not shaped, is less shaped by its own people, by its own scholars, its own intellectuals, by the graduates who come out of this university and other universities across the continent. And so in our hearts of hearts, we know that our character has been at the core, at the center of who we are becoming. So yes, we've accomplished extraordinary things together. So what has been the formula? What has been the formula that has brought us to this point? What has been the formula that has brought you to this point? That has brought us to this point? It has been a formula of an infectious and an ambitious vision for this university. A vision beyond the merger. As much as the merger provided us with an excellent platform for building this university, the merger was not the end point. It was the catalytic point to enable us to forge ahead and to advance closer towards this vision that we had developed and mobilized ourselves around. And so our challenge is day in, day out to examine how we are making progress in relationship to this vision. An international university of choice, anchored in Africa, deliberately, definitively shaping the future. And so it's been about a vision. If we run our families, if we map the future of our families, we don't just hope and pray. Yes, there is time, that's important, but equally important is the importance of setting a vision for ourselves. And so it's been about a vision, but a vision is not good enough, right? A vision is not good enough on its own. An infectious, ambitious vision is a critical and an essential condition. Equally though, is to have passionate people. And so the character, our character has shone through and continues to shine through in this, the 11th year of our university. A character of resolve, resolve. Yes, nothing is easy. Nothing is easy. I'm not going to talk about the consolidation of health sciences to illustrate the point. Nothing is easy. A great vision will not be accomplished easily. A low vision will be accomplished easily. And so an ambitious and infectious vision will imply struggle, will imply going through some of our deepest, darkest hours. But the irony about going through the deepest, darkest moments, personally and collectively, is the surprise that waits. Is the surprise that comes. So when we had the tragic stampede, look at the surprise that came. A world-class system, late application, online, no walking. And so sometimes from disaster and tragedy, there are surprises that we find along the way. And so there are many surprises that we have found along the way. Hopefully mainly positive, constructive, energizing, affirmative. But we have to struggle through, as we have shown in our character. We have struggled through. And so that's what resolve is about. It's about the ability to say, I have set myself an almost impossible vision and goal, set of goals. But I will struggle through. I will prevail. Prevail we did. And so that is testimony to our character. A character that reflects a humanity that is deeply committed to embracing all in our nation, embracing the weakest and the most vulnerable, the poorest amongst us, as we do in respect of the rich, the richest in our nation. So I end there by saying that this has been a worthwhile journey. It's been a worthwhile journey. Yesterday at the staff welcome, one of the new members of staff got up and suggested something along the following lines, that why is it that UCT, a 100-year-old university, compares itself with a 10-year-old university? Of course, he was saying it tongue-in-cheek, but it's something to consider. It's something to consider. That we have accomplished extraordinary things in a decade. Something which UCT accomplished in 100 years. Think about it. And think about the character that sits in you, that sits in us as this collective, and it has brought us to this point. Think about it, reflect on it as we celebrate, as we pause, but also as we reflect on what is needed in the next decade. So the merger was the catalytic event. What is the catalytic event that's going to catalyze us into the next decade and help us, enable us to continue to build the legacy of the University of Johannesburg. So congratulations. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. Yes, it was hard labor, hard work, intellectual, physical struggle. Maar uiteindelik as ons nou kyk, beskou wat ons tesame gedoen het, wat hier voor ons nou sit, dan moet ons sê, then we have to say that this is an extraordinary accomplishment. And yet, it's a working project. Yet, it is an unfinished job. Yet, far more needs to be accomplished. But let's pause and say thank you. Let's pause and simply say to each other, to oneself first, say to yourself first, thank you. And then to the one next to you, or the two next to you, just shake their hand. Just shake their hand and say, wow, what an accomplishment.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.